The phone call came exactly 1 minute after my funeral ended. And I know that sentence already sounds impossible. But that's the problem with impossible things. They don't ask permission before they arrive. They just show up and wait to see if you'll acknowledge them. And when my phone buzzed in my pocket as I stood alone in the parking lot outside the cemetery, still wearing the black suit I'd bought for my own goodbye, the first thing I noticed wasn't the caller ID or the time. It was the vibration pattern, slow and deliberate. The same one I'd programmed years ago, so I'd know when something mattered. And that detail alone was enough to make my stomach drop. I stared at the screen without answering it, watching the name fade in and out as the signal struggled because the name was unknown, and yet something about it felt intimate, practiced, like a knock that already knew the rhythm of my door. When the call went to voicemail, I exhaled shakily and told myself this was shock, grief, adrenaline. The brain's last fireworks after a long day of pretending to be composed in front of people who thought I was still alive. I got into my car, closed the door, and that's when the voicemail notification appeared. One message, 32 seconds long. I didn't play it right away. I sat there listening to the tick of the engine cooling, the distant sound of mourners driving away, and I thought about how strange it is that funerals end so cleanly. Like grief has an exit sign, and I pressed play. "Thank you," the voice said. It was calm, relieved, and unmistakably mine. I dropped the phone. It bounced off the passenger seat and slid onto the floor, still playing as my own voice continued speaking without me. "Thank you for coming today," it said, tone gentle, conversational, like I was hosting something instead of burying it. "It means more than you know. I know this was hard. I know you didn't understand everything. But you did exactly what I needed." My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. I scrambled to pick the phone back up, thumb shaking as I paused the message. Because hearing yourself speak words you don't remember saying is a special kind of violation. One that crawls under the skin and doesn't leave. I looked around the car, half expecting to see someone else there. Some explanation waiting patiently in the back seat. But it was just me and the smell of leather and the echo of my own voice trapped in a device I suddenly didn't trust. I laughed once, sharp and breathless, because laughter is what you do when panic hasn't decided what shape it wants yet. And I told myself this was a prank, a recording pulled from an old interview. A cruel coincidence stitched together by a bad day. Then the phone vibrated again. Another voicemail. 40 seconds this time. I didn't let it go to voicemail. I answered without thinking, my mouth moving faster than my fear, because reflex is a powerful thing. "Hello," I said, and the line was quiet for a beat too long. The silence thick and expectant, like something adjusting to my presence. Then my voice answered me back live, without delay. "Hey," it said warmly. "I was hoping you'd pick up this time." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, like proximity might force reality to behave. "Don't hang up," the voice continued, and there was a smile in it I recognized. One I used when I was trying to soften a difficult truth. I know this is confusing. It's supposed to be. Confusion keeps you from asking the wrong questions. My hand started to shake violently. "Who is this?" I whispered, even though I already knew the answer my body was bracing for. The voice chuckled softly. "You know who this is?" it said. "I'm the part of you that didn't get buried." The call disconnected. The screen went dark, and the parking lot fell completely silent. I sat there for a long time after that, trying to slow my breathing, replaying every second of the call in my head like a detective looking for a misstep, a glitch, anything human enough to hold on to. And that's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. The voice hadn't sounded distorted or hollow or wrong the way recordings usually do. It sounded rested, clear, relieved, like something that had finally finished waiting. When I finally drove home, the city looked slightly off. Not in a dramatic way, but in the subtle way that makes you question your depth perception. Like everything was standing a fraction of an inch too close to me. And every time my phone buzzed, I flinched, my pulse jumping even when it was just a text or an email. By the time I reached my house, I was exhausted enough to almost believe it hadn't happened at all. Almost. The third voicemail was waiting when, I walked inside. 1 minute, 12 seconds long. Sent while I was driving. I didn't listen to it right away. I put my keys on the table, hung my jacket, went through the motions of normalcy like muscle memory could overwrite terror. And only when I was sitting on the edge of my bed did I press play. I forgot to mention something earlier. My voice said, closer now, more familiar, like it was speaking from the other side of the room instead of a device. There's going to be a point where you'll want to tell someone about this. A friend. A doctor. Maybe the police. That's understandable. The voice paused, letting the silence do some of the work. Please don't. The moment you give this an audience, it becomes permanent. My throat tightened. What do you want? I whispered to the empty room. The phone vibrated gently in my hand, as if responding to the question itself, and a new message appeared on the screen. Incoming call? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The phone stopped ringing on its own. And another voicemail arrived immediately after. Short, just 7 seconds. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned, then finally played it. You already helped, my voice said softly. You let them say goodbye. That closed the door. Now I just need you to stay quiet. I set the phone face down on the bed and pressed my palms into my eyes, trying to ground myself in pressure and darkness, because something in the phrasing had slid into place with horrifying clarity. You let them say goodbye. The funeral hadn't been for me. It had been for something else. Something that needed witnesses. Something that needed to be acknowledged as gone so it could finish becoming whatever it was now. That night, I dreamed of standing in the back of a church watching my own service from a distance. The coffin closed, the room full, the air heavy with acceptance, and as the last hymn ended, I felt a presence beside me. Close enough that our shoulders almost touched. See, my voice whispered from somewhere that wasn't my mouth. They let go. That's the hardest part. I woke up gasping, sheets tangled around my legs, my phone buzzing on the nightstand like it had been waiting for me to resurface. One missed call. One new voicemail. I didn't listen to it, not yet. I stared at the ceiling, heart racing, and understood the shape of the trap with sudden, brutal clarity. Whatever had survived my death didn't want my life back. It wanted my silence. And it was thanking me because, without realizing it, I'd already started giving it exactly that. I didn't listen to the voicemail that night. Not because I was brave, but because I finally understood that bravery and compliance look identical to something that feeds on attention. So I left the phone on the kitchen counter and slept with the bedroom door open like I was daring the house to watch me breathe. And when morning came, the light felt wrong in the way it always does after a bad dream. Too bright, too eager. Like it was trying to prove something had ended when it hadn't. The phone was still there when I woke up. Face down, silent, and for a few hours, nothing happened. Which was worse than the calls, because silence had become the most articulate sound of all. I showered. I dressed. I drank coffee that tasted like nothing. Every normal action felt like a rehearsal for a life I wasn't sure I still owned. And when my sister called to ask how I was holding up, I almost told her everything. Almost let my voice carry the shape of fear to another human being. But the third voicemail echoed in my head the moment you give this an audience. It becomes permanent and I lied instead, softly and convincingly. The way I'd lied on stage 1,000 times without ever thinking of it as lying. I'm okay, I said. And the word okay felt like a small sacrifice placed carefully on an altar. I couldn't see. The phone rang again at 11:06 a.m. Not buzzing this time, but ringing. A sound I hadn't heard since before the funeral. And my body reacted before my mind could intervene. Muscles tightening, breath shortening. The old reflex to answer anything that sounds urgent. And I hated myself for that reflex because I finally recognized it for what it was. Training. I didn't pick up. I watched the screen light up and fade as the call went unanswered. And seconds later, the voicemail icon appeared like a reward. I waited longer this time before listening, forcing myself to sit with the not knowing until it dulled into something manageable, and when I finally pressed play, my voice sounded different, closer, quieter. I can feel you resisting, it said gently. That's new. I'm proud of you. The word proud hit me harder than anger would have because pride is intimacy pretending to be encouragement. I slammed the phone down on the counter like I could bruise it. "Stop!" I said aloud, my voice cracking in the empty kitchen. And the house did something subtle but unmistakable. It leaned. I started noticing gaps in time after that, moments where I'd swear I'd done something only to find evidence that I hadn't. The trash still full, the door still locked, the stove still cold, and I understood that whatever had survived my death wasn't just calling me. It was practicing being me, slipping into the spaces I left unattended. The realization didn't come with panic. It came with a strange professional clarity, the kind you get when you finally see the structure of a joke or the mechanics of a trick. This thing wasn't trying to replace me wholesale. It was trying to inherit me incrementally. Small silences, small lies, small moments of compliance that added up to continuity. The funeral hadn't closed a door. It had transferred custody. I drove to the cemetery that afternoon, not out of sentiment, but out of necessity, because I needed to see my name in stone. Needed proof that something had ended definitively somewhere in the world. And when I stood in front of the fresh earth and the temporary marker with my name on it, I felt a flicker of relief that surprised me. There it was. Me. Contained. A boundary. My phone buzzed in my pocket as if on cue, and I almost laughed at the predictability of it. I didn't take it out. I didn't listen. I spoke instead, quietly, to the dirt. "You don't get this," I said, not raising my voice, not performing grief for the sky. "This part is done." The wind stirred the grass. Nothing answered. For the first time since the calls began, the silence didn't feel expectant. It felt bored. The breakthrough came that evening in the most ordinary way possible. I was folding laundry, half watching the news, when the phone rang again, and without thinking, I turned it off. Not airplane mode. Not silent. Off. The screen went black, and the room felt heavier for a moment. Like something had stumbled, and then the weight lifted. I stood there with a shirt in my hands, heart racing, and realized how stupidly simple that felt. The calls had power because I was available. Availability had been my brand my entire life, available to audiences, to expectations, to grief, to the people who needed me to show up and say something meaningful. This thing had learned that lesson too well. I left the phone off and waited for the consequences. They came quietly. The next morning, I woke with a headache that felt like pressure rather than pain, and I found myself halfway through a sentence I didn't remember starting. Standing in the living room with my mouth open and no one there to hear it, panic surged, sharp and fast, because that was new, and new was dangerous. And I realized that cutting off the calls hadn't starved the thing completely. It had just forced it to change strategy. If it couldn't reach me through the phone, it would reach me through habit, through memory, through the grooves my voice had worn into my own life. I sat down hard on the couch and pressed my palms together, grounding myself in the physical world. And I made a decision that scared me more than answering ever had. I called my doctor. I didn't tell him about the voice or the calls or the funeral. Not directly. I told him about the gaps. The pressure. The feeling of being watched from inside my own sentences. As I spoke, I felt something recoil, subtle but unmistakable, like a hand pulling back from a hot surface. And I understood then that it wasn't just attention that fed this thing. It was isolation, privacy, the closed loop of me listening to myself. When my doctor suggested an evaluation, when he asked gentle questions that forced me to slow down and name things carefully, the pressure eased further. And I felt something important slipping out of my grasp. My sanity. But exclusivity. Whatever had thanked me after the funeral had wanted me alone. It wanted me quiet and contained and uncontradicted. It didn't want witnesses. That night, with the phone still off, I stood in the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. The way you do when you're checking for damage you're afraid to find. And I spoke deliberately, choosing each word like it mattered. "You don't get to finish my sentences," I said. My reflection didn't answer. The house didn't lean. The air stayed neutral. I waited longer, half expecting retaliation, but nothing came. The absence felt different this time, not like a held breath. but like a decision that had gone against expectation. I slept deeply for the first time since the funeral. And when I woke, the headache was gone. The phone remained off for days, then weeks. I bought a cheap replacement with a new number and gave it only to people who could look me in the eye. The old phone stayed in a drawer, powered down, its screen dark and uninviting. And whatever had lived in its circuits didn't follow me into the new one. Occasionally, I still feel the urge to check the old device, to see if anything tried to reach me while I wasn't listening, but I've learned to treat that urge the way you treat any bad habit. It's distance and daylight and a refusal to romanticize it. The truth settled slowly, the way truths do when they're heavy enough to change posture. I hadn't survived my death unscathed. Something had come back with me, but it wasn't all powerful or clever or deserving of a name. It was opportunistic. It was trained. It knew my voice because I'd spent a lifetime teaching the world how to listen to it. The funeral hadn't created it. It had just given it closure. And closure, I learned too late, can be an invitation if you don't pay attention to who's still standing in the room when the lights go out. Months later, I visited the cemetery again, not out of fear this time, but out of respect. And I stood by the marker and said goodbye properly. Without witnesses, without recording, without gratitude. "You don't need me anymore," I said, and I meant it in every direction. The wind moved the grass. A bird lifted off. Nothing answered back. I walked away lighter, carrying a silence that finally belonged to me, and I understood the last. Simplest rule of all, some things survive only as long as you keep thanking them for not leaving.